So welcome everybody and thank you for joining this at short notice. I think short notice is the way forward now. You just announce and then you pull people together. We've been wanting to do this for a while through the EF to organize either presentations or conversations between EF members to bring sectors together on a common issue. And then Harsha Kurasinghe had the idea to start it at this time. So I think it's quite a powerful start. We have two very well-known figures, respected members of the EF, Dr. Anuruddha Padeniya and Mr. Ajit Niwad Cabral, who will be speaking today, both of them presenting ideas that they've developed from their own sectors. Dr. Padeniya is going to be speaking to us, giving us some background information on COVID-19 and also sharing with us some of the ideas of the GMOA exit strategy proposal that was presented to the government. And Mr. Cabral will be sharing with us his proposed COVID equity fund plan that he has also shared publicly. And moderating this session is Anushka Vijayasinghe, who's an economist who focuses on Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and the Maldives. And he's not from the EF, and part of this structure was actually to bring an independent moderator in to interview EF members. Anushka, thank you very much for jumping in to this sort of experimental kind of format that we are trying out here. Basically, what will happen here is we've just invited the EF members to join us live, but we will be putting this together and making it public after this. And we'll also be developing this format based on the success and challenges of this very first talk. So I think that's it from me and Harsha. So I'll just hand it over to Anushka, who will maybe take us through some of the basic structure of the next hour.
Great. Thanks, Ruanti. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you with this information session. And it's great to see so many familiar faces. It'll be a short and sharp session. I know a lot of us might be feeling a bit zoomed out right now, lots of webinars, lots of online calls, but I think this one is going to be different and quite rewarding. So a few housekeeping notices. This series starting today is designed as an information session featuring Eisenhower Fellows who have recently written or been part of writing something on the COVID exit management and recovery approaches. It will not be styled as a debate, but rather as an information session, lasting about an hour. We'll give 15 minutes each to the speakers to introduce their thoughts and ideas on the two matters that Ruanti mentioned. We will first go with Dr. Padeniya, who will speak, and then I will pose a couple of questions of my own, and then take some questions from you. So please post it in the chat box. And then we will move to Mr. Niwad Cabral and do the same, where he will speak, pose a couple of questions, and then take questions from you from the chat box. So let's dive straight in. Dr. Padeniya, over to you for your 15 minutes, and then questions after that.
Very much for giving this opportunity. First of all, I thank the Eisenhower Fellowship for taking this leadership, because this is a health matter, but we can't handle alone. Everybody should be aware. So I think I straight away go to the technical issues of this COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 is COVID is the coronavirus, is RNA virus, which initially presented to the world from China, and ultimately they were expecting it to be spread to all over the world, and we were basically studying the material and getting ready for it. Technically, this disease is considered as a public health emergency. What do you mean by the public health? In the health sector, we have two aspects, that is the public health and the curative health. Now, basically, the public health is attempting by means of prevention diseases, and the curative sector is basically from the treatment lines. So this actually the public health part comes first, and as now I am also a clinician, and we come second in this case. Though it is a public health emergency, the impression of an emergency is it comes and goes, like say tsunami or whatever the emergency that comes and goes. But here, of course, this COVID-19, I will explain it later, emergency which will last for a while. That is why we need to plan ourselves to face all other consequences, not only in the health sector, but also in the economic and other social aspect had to be dealt in this case. The second point I want to highlight is that this is a global challenge. Now, if this affected only our country, we had all the opportunity of getting kind of help and assistance from the other countries. But since it is a global challenge which had affected the poor and rich alike, powerful countries and powerless, so other countries alike, since it's a global challenge, we had to handle in that context. So both these aspects are important when we are going to handle this disease. Now, then the next thing is when we are going to plan the strategy, we have to have grading of or the severity grading of this disease. Now, we have gone by the WHO classification of this kind of public health issues. Number one, we have 4 stages. Number one stage 1 is when you don't have disease or no cases confirmed in the country. That's the first level. The second level is when you have sporadic cases. Sporadic in the sense you get cases from time to time from various places. So then you call the sporadic phase. The third phase is the clustering phase, where you get not only single cases, but you get about more than one clusters coming up all over. And the fourth stage is the dangerous phase, that is the community spread. Now, having understood our situation is, we classified this disease into 3 phases. The first phase was the Wuhan incidents from China. That was in December 2019, up to finding out the first case in Sri Lanka. That was 11th of March. So until that phase, I would like to call that is phase number 1. So during that phase, we were in WHO stage 1. As you can see, there hadn't been any cases, despite there was a Chinese ready, but we didn't have local cases up to now, up to then. So from March 11th onwards, we started experiencing or confirming cases in the country. So we went into the stage 2, and straight away from there, we have gone to the clustering phase to stage 3. So at that point, we highlighted to the government the value of entertaining this kind of taking actions or interventions to this condition. But interestingly, from 26th of January, we had meetings in the country to face this issue. Now, when we are going to handle this issue, there are 3 pillars we have to touch. Now, the first pillar is the political will. And we have seen the president himself taking the initiatives on 26th of January to summon meetings, and then the Minister of Health in the ministry level to face any kind of situations at the level of stage 2 and stage 3 WHO stages of this disease. And despite we got ready, we had to face coming up cases from 11th of March. So that is the first pillar. The second pillar is the health capacity, and the third pillar is the social capital. Now, therefore, the second issue of this addressing the health capacity, with regard to this COVID-19, it's a unique disease compared to, there had been 6 global warnings since 2000 in the world. I can show you it. I don't know how to upload it, but now just to read it for you, there had been 6 global challenges declared by WHO since year 2000. Now, when you see these 6 challenges or global challenges, the SARS and MERS, then bird flu, all these diseases had a mortality rate. Mortality in the sense the death rate is higher than COVID. Sometimes the bird flu death rate is about 40%, and MERS death rate was about 34%. SARS was about 10%. But whereas COVID death rate was at that point, that was early March, was quoted as 2%, but now it is quoted at 4%. You can see the death rate or the mortality figures are a bit lower in this disease. Then why we worry is the very important reason is that though the death rate is low, the spreading ability of this disease is very unprecedented and unusual. And to be honest with you, according to the publications made by China, who are the best scientists at the moment on this issue, they claim that one person will be able to spread to 512 people if he is allowed to mobilize himself all over the place, and within 30 days. So therefore, that disease has a high R naught value. What do you mean by R naught is, you can see this graph. Now, when you have one person affected, if we give it to two people, and if that person is giving another two people, like if we have this chain going down, you can see you will have a lot of cases. This is what you call by R naught. And now, hello? Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Padri. We can hear you.
Now, the second scenario is then you call it an epidemic. And if you have R naught level of 1 equals, so one fellow will spread only to 1. So that is not the scenario with this COVID. And when you are going to plan the treatment strategies, what we have to do is we have to bring the R naught less than 1, where one person will spread to less than 1, then only we will be able to shrink this curve and bring under control. So because of that, this disease can spread to 512 people if he's completely allowed to mobilize himself all over. We had to plan some kind of a strategy to control their mobility, and that is why the strategy which was proposed to control the disease is called this hammer and dance pattern, where we are supposed to head on with this disease and to hammer the disease down to a level. And once you hit hard to this disease by all our strategies, what will happen is we think that will get eliminated or eradicated. That stage will come only after introduction of a vaccine, which is due in 1 year's time or more. And because of that, there will be some cases fluctuating right alone. So therefore, what they expect is this fluctuation, they have called the word dance. So therefore, the expected kind of the disease pattern will be hammered, and then you will have a dance phase. It's like you get a cancer and you have to learn to live with the cancer with ups and downs or small bits of fluctuations. So how to hammer the disease was the problem. So the hammering of the disease is to take care of any suspected person, to do the testing and get it confirmed, and then whoever get contact to that person will have to be tested, and you have to do the necessary, either ideally you have to isolate them. Unless you isolate that person, you will not be able to stop spreading to the other people. So this is the strategy. But unfortunately, late March, there had been certain other findings which actually affected the control of this disease. Those findings are, now when you see the SARS, which came up earlier on, there is this all patients who had SARS virus infection were symptomatic. That means they were showing their symptoms. So through symptoms, they presented to the hospitals and we could manage that situation. But here, of course, the problem is we got to know that 20% is asymptomatic. Asymptomatic means no symptoms will be presented. Like now, the most of these Navy people, they don't know that they have the disease, but because they got contacted, they were tested and they found they have the disease and they are spreading the disease without having any symptom, at least a fever or cough within them. 20%. Another 60% will have very minor symptoms. So they will also will not possibly present to the health sector. So only 20% will present. So basically, what I have to say is the disease characteristics is such that these patients are, this disease has the ability to hide within the community. The second thing is now the techniques to detect or the test. Now there are various types of tests are available. I will only go through this PCR test. And the PCR is the polymerase right chain. You take pieces of this RNA and you multiply it further and you get the test results. Even then, the test sensitivity, that means if you test 100 sick people with COVID, only 70% will be confirmed as disease. So another 30 will be missing. So therefore, the sensitivity of the PCR test is only 70%. So because of that also, the testing ability is also not going to fulfill our ability to detect people for us to aggressively pick up the patients. So because of that, most of these patients have the ability to spread it all over the whoever who be in contact. So that is why that is the basis of introduction of this lockdown or curfew, and the basic principle is to minimize the mobility of these patients or the public. Now, when you are going to apply the mobility principle, now if you, as I told, if you are freely mobile, they will spread to 512 people. But if you limit their mobility to 70% by putting curfew or whatever, then they will have the 70%, they will have a dip here, there will be reduction of cases, but there is a second surge which was predicted. That is why we instructed the government to go for 80% or 90% control of their activities or mobilities, and that is to achieve the so-called hammer phase and to bring it down to the dance phase, that not to eliminate or eradicate the disease. So I think we are fairly good at that level, but unfortunately what happened was the instructions we gave it to the health sector was to do the aggressive testing. The late March, there were two proposals made by the WHO. Number one was aggressive testing. Until that time, because of this low sensitivity, the WHO and the other experts were of the opinion you should not aggressively test because we are missing 30%, and that 30% will have false assurance and they will spread the disease. By that time, they were not aware that majority are either asymptomatic or very minor symptoms. That is why they plan that strategy. But once they get to know that majority will not present to the health sector, they suggested two strategies. One is to aggressively test patients. Second strategy, now because of this lack of sensitivity, to do tests several times, or they call it test, or repeated testing, in order to capture the, to improve the sensitivity of the disease, sensitivity of the test. Now, based on that suggestions, we made proposals to the government at that point to go for aggressive testing and test all, which was accommodated, that proposal was accommodated by the epidemiology unit of the country after about 2-3 weeks after we proposed it. So that was the delay, and during that time, this Navy people, they were not aggressively tested, and ultimately they're in the rotation of going home, and couple of fellows had the disease and they had the ability to spread all over. That is why this Navy spread of disease took place. Now the exit, now what you can see here is what is this flattening the curve. Now if you see China, they have flattened the curve, but they are in the dance phase, and so ups and downs of disease, and they are handling that situation. So let me now go through the exit plan. Now, exit plan, what we propose to the government is in our website. Basically, what we propose to the government through this exit plan was, people were under the impression that exit means we are going to completely eliminate all our strategy. It is not. We have to understand exit plans is just to go through to the dance phase. So therefore, New Zealand, they call it bringing down of alertness rather than exit. So therefore, even if you lift the curfew, we have to have some measures and controls. We can't completely, from 90% immobility, you can't bring it down straight away to zero. So it will be gradually we have to do. So the principle we worked out here in our proposal this was proposed to the president on 4th of April, and we produced it on 30th of March, and we publish in our website as well. And interestingly, there were other exit plans were also proposed, but interestingly, the Oxford University and Paris University, they also have proposed exit plan, which is in this document, which is in the web, to the World Economic Forum. And basically, they are talking about the same principle here. So after 19 days of our publication, that came to effect. And the basis of this exit plan is simply we went by the principles we follow in a surgical theater. Now, you might have walked into a surgical theater or wheeled into a surgical theater when you are ill. It is supposed to be sterile, no organisms. But you are going into the theater from a contaminated zone. So in between, we have a buffer zone. So there are three zones, that is the green zone, or what we can call sterile zone. Outside you have the contaminated zone, and in between we have the buffer zone. So the same principle was suggested, and we proposed 9 items in this proposal. What are the 9 items? The first, what is the definition or criteria of a green zone? What is the definition of a buffer zone? Then what is the definition of a contaminated zone? Green, yellow, red. And that can be read in this document. Then once you decide, now it's like this, when somebody gets up in the morning, he should be aware my diagnosis, whether I'm in a green, red or yellow zone. Then subsequently, that person will have to know what he should do next. So those are the next contents of this document. The governance principle, what is the governance or activity plan for the green zone, buffer zone, and to the contaminated or the red zone. But that is not enough. Now, if there are contaminated zones and there are green zones, you have to develop governance principles for the border crossing. So that is also had to be included. So you can see there are 7 items up to now. Last 2 items are, now once you achieve that situation, how are you going to shrink the contaminated zones? Then how are you going to expand the green zones? That is number 8 and 9. These are the 9 items we have proposed to the government, and we have put it in video format. Small videos are produced how you are going to do that, and that also can be seen in our website. And basically, I don't know whether you will be able to see this thing. The smallest size of a zone we have taken as AGA divisions, or district secretariat divisions, for the simple reason, because the district secretariat, you have 331 AGA divisions. Those are independent, that can function independently with regard to their economy, with regard to their health, and with regard to their banking other facilities to I am not telling optimum, to some extent. So that is why we considered that. But I think what was open was larger than that. Apart from the 3 or 4 districts all over the country was open after that. And that is the basic principle we have suggested. I think my time is over. I think I can stop at that point. If you want further other criteria, I can go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Pardania, for taking everyone through both some useful points about COVID itself, but also the key features of the GMOA proposal. I have a couple of questions, and then I'll take a few questions that are coming from the chat. So as you mentioned, Sri Lanka has followed this hammer and dance approach. So in order to ensure that in the quote unquote dance phase, the dance is as muted as possible, in my layman's understanding, aggressive testing is needed. And it's something that the GMO has also reiterated repeatedly. So my question, and I have a couple of sub-questions in it, how do you see this testing strategy that has been followed up to now changing from the current approach to once society and the economy are opened up and movement resumes? So, and within that, my sub-questions are that in some countries, they are considering ways after their lockdown, they're considering ways to get people to voluntarily get tested, go to clinics or pharmacies or drive-thrus and get tested. So do you see this as a feature of Sri Lanka's post-lockdown phase? That's the first question. The second aspect is on availability and production of testing kits. At the moment, these are mostly imported, as I understand, and I know that Hemind is on call, and I know that Cleantech has done some work on the swabs, but largely the kit itself is imported. Do you see a need for Sri Lanka to start producing these even for a certain period? And is that even feasible? Do the health economics of it allow it? So basically, to recap, first question is on how do you recommend pivoting the testing strategy in a post-lockdown phase? What would that testing look like? And secondly, availability of testing kits, importation or production.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That is a vital question. Now, very importantly, what I can simply tell you is, now testing, there are 4 elements with regard to testing. Now, first of all, I have to tell the basis of this aggressive testing and this test, that is repetitive testing principle I told you earlier on. And once you go for that strategy, once you open it, when you go to the dance phase, now what you said is the voluntary testing is one thing you suggested, but whatever it is, whether we are going to do voluntary testing or not, now if the government feels or the health sector feels that you have to test on somebody, you have to test. So the appropriate people have to be tested. So therefore, how are we going to decide that whether the X should be tested, the Y should not be tested? That decision had to be made. So to make that decision, number one issue is you have to have very good information system. Now currently the information is gathered by 4 teams. One is the health team, the other team is this administrative team or the Grama Sevaka divisions, and the third team is the police, and the 4th team is the military. So all this intelligence are in work. But what we gathered during the past with our experience is the military is doing the best strategy to trace then and they are very quick. So whatever the strategy, what we said is to gather information, whom to be tested, and then and there quickly it had to be done. So information gathering is number one. Number 2 is the attitude to test. Now that is what we had to beat with the health ministry, especially the epidemiology unit. They had the attitude of we will delay the testing, we will do the quarantine first and then test, and that kind of attitude. So we had to beat that strategy. Third issue is, as you very correctly said, the test algorithm or the what is the policy on testing. Now there are various types of tests. We have the PCR test, and there is, you can do the antibody test, and then there is a new development where the pooling of test, and then there is another test attitude where you pick up antigen test of the COVID. Now all the, when you put all the tests in place, now PCR has the highest sensitivity, all the other tests have lesser than that sensitivity. So therefore what test you are going to select at the correct point. Then again, when you contact the disease after 8-9 days, the PCRs will start slowly become negative, but the antibodies will start going on. So what test you are going to do? Then Germany and Harvard, they have developed this pooling of test. So that is the, so whatever the policy will have to be developed. So we have been pressing to develop a policy since 24th of March to all the virologists in the country, chemical pathologists in the country, but they have developed some proposal or algorithm or a policy which we think yet there's a scope for improvement to a great extent. Number 4 is the logistic of testing. As you said, I will just explain the PCR test. PCR test, you have to have about 15 items in place to do that, but at least minimum compulsory there are 4 items. That is the extraction kit, then the swab, then the viral transport medium, and the test kit. Now I think currently Sri Lanka is having reasonable number of test kits in the country, but with regard to, as you very correctly pointed out, the swabs and other material went out of stocks several times, and they have started developing them in Sri Lanka, but then once you develop it, whether it is working had to be validated, in the sense, now there are patients at that moment, so they will give it to various patients and see, validate. And the logistics is, now this test is done at 14 places at the moment in the country. So therefore we have to see whether all these 14 places are getting adequate supplies of all these 4 items, and so the logistics handling. So those are the challenges at the moment, and especially if there's a spread of the disease in a big way, I think that will be a problem. But at the same time, to produce in the country, and produce will not only look after our interest, that will have a exportation ability also.
So, Dr. Padini, so thanks for that. I think I have a few other follow-on questions of my own on that, but I'm conscious of the time, so I want to take these questions from the members of the audience. So, two questions that broadly cover the same issue, which is, yes, the last couple of days we've seen cases that are coming from news sources, and I think Harsha has posed this, that the Army Command also noted that they found it challenging to trace or find the source. So his question is, do you think this means we are moving to community spread by any chance? And a related, somewhat related question also is, another question, how bad is the threat of community spread now in Sri Lanka? Would you anticipate a second and worse surge in cases?
That's a very valid question, because once you see, so far, all the cases which came up were in the track, or they were traceable and they had a contact. But as you see, there are 4 patients recently presented without giving a clear evidence or a history or information with regard to what their contacts are. If that is going to be the case, as you say, that will have a difficult situation. Currently, only few cases of that nature, but the rest of the things are under control. So today we develop a small proposal to the up to the GN divisions. That is, we have 14,221 GN divisions in the country, to develop a kind of a team who will provide us with information, though the patient says that they didn't have any contact, to verify that is true. So kind of we want to improve the source of information to us with regard to their contacts. As you say, we are facing a trouble with not only the health, intelligence, everybody, how these 4 people got the disease. At the same time, another important fact is, when your immunity is low, when you have the disease, their recovery phase will be longer, because the problem here is the disease had to be dealt by the immune system of your body. All the either Western medical or Eastern medical, all of us are basically supporting the person to come out of the disease. We don't have a clear treatment for it. So therefore, their immunity had to be sound. So when your immunity is low, that is why we ask them to not to smoke, their diabetics to be under control, and cancers and all these things. That is why the most of the patients who had the kind of, one recent patient said that he had the second surge. So basically, rather than the second surge, they couldn't eliminate the disease out of their body, possibly because their immunity is not sound as it is expected.
Dr. Padini, last 2 questions. The first is the stigmatization of the disease preventing people from coming forward? Do we need a softer media strategy and public awareness?
I agree with that. I think more than the stigmatization, what has happened is the information we gather, that some people, despite all these measures of information to the public, some haven't taken from that kind of spirit up to that level. Secondly, even if they understand the condition, their living conditions is such that they will not be able to comply with whatever we tell. Like say, when they are living in a slum and if there is a 10 by 10 room for 4 people to sleep, and so therefore we may keep telling various strategies, but whether it is implemented at the grassroots level and whether it is possible is a question. That is why when we are going to, in our exit strategy, we have told very clearly, when you are going to build up the criteria for green, red and yellow, that criteria should not only based on the health parameters. It had to be on a matrix with regard to their health, with regard to their economic and social conditions. So therefore, certain areas might get under these dangerous zones, not because of they got the disease by now, but they they have high vulnerability based on their social conditions. So all this, that is why we can't handle alone in health. It had to be a kind of multiple prone activities, and all these sectors have to be considered, especially before we start schools.
Dr. Pardini, a final question to you, and perhaps on an area that has got less attention, but increasingly will need to be considered, and it's on mental health. So the question is, in terms of health, we also have aspects such as mental well-being, physical exercise, and psychological well-being. So far, it seems that the Sri Lankan approach has not addressed this, at least officially. All these things also help strengthen our immune system. Should this also not be taken into consideration? What are your thoughts on that as the final comment?
Not only the mental conditions, we have to have a good approach to handle all the NCDs, non-communicable diseases, because that is also brings down your immunity. The vulnerable categories are basically who are having NCDs and people who are older than certain ages, and those are the vulnerable groups. And then the other health and social economic and social conditions are the vulnerable parameters. So not only mental health, but also the NCDs have to be dealt with. One good thing here is now, because of they are shut to their places, what we could gather is by them eating these products which may be affecting their health, is been now they are, rather than them like school children and them, rather than they go to school without any meal, nowadays they get the meal at home. So we had to study this situation, and they are mental, not only mental, but the rest. But that's a very valid question that had to be addressed.
Is there enough mental health professionals, Dr. Pardania, to support those who may be affected by this after the immediate and obvious health concerns are solved?
Yeah, at the moment, yes. But one thing here, what our observations during tsunami and floods and other issues, especially tsunami, there were a lot of teams did a lot of surveys on the necessity of this mental health. But ultimately, we are so resilient on that aspect with regard to mental health to a great extent. I think because of our social backgrounds and the culture, the mental health aspect is basically with regard to tsunami, we didn't get the quantum of work as we expected according to the impact of the tsunami with regard to economic and other loss of their health and other social reasons, but we are fairly resilient. Those days we had limited number of psychiatrists in this country. Nowadays we have a significant number in the country. I don't say we are optimum, but we have a significant number. I think our capacity to handle mental health is okay. But as you said, thorough approach to see whether what amount of work had to be done is to be, I think there is a scope for studies and improvements.
Thank you, Dr. Pardania. I have more questions also on what you said, and we have a few more questions on the chat, but we need to move on. And I know you also need to get across to another interview. So thanks very much. And maybe
I wait till 8 o'clock. I wait till 8 o'clock.
Sure. And we'll move to Mr. Nimad Cabral now, and maybe Eisenhower Fellows could consider a follow-up maybe a month from now, where Dr. Pardini can reflect more on what the post-lockdown phase actually looked like compared to the proposals.